It seems like wherever you go now, there are little kids, even babies, getting screen time. So in cafes, restaurants, sometimes at playgrounds. I've even seen phones attached to prams to keep the baby entertained. And interestingly, it's not even just that the kids have a screen, it's also that the screen is so close to their face that it's practically touching their nose. And on top of that, a lot of schools have even started introducing their own iPad programs. I recently went to a kid's birthday party where every kid there was on a screen. They were aged roughly between 2 and 15 years old, and it was really sad for my toddler because she was actually going up to these kids hoping that maybe one of them would play with her, and no one did, basically because these kids were so obviously immersed in their screen time. But to tell you the truth, I used to let my kids have a lot of screen time. So before I get into the top 5 reasons, let me tell you my story first. So my toddler was getting screen time daily, which incidentally meant that my baby was getting screen time too. Basically, my toddler would spend the morning and early afternoon doing constructive things, such as swimming, going to playgrounds, painting, whatever else. And by the time it was around mid-afternoon, I just desperately felt like I needed a break. And so typically that was when the TV would go on. At the time, it seemed like a win-win situation. While she was learning about colours, the alphabet, numbers, the Great Barrier Reef, it meant that I could finally get a break to myself, so I could enjoy a coffee without any interruption. Admittedly though, once the TV was on, it was probably left on for hours. For the most part, everything seemed fine, but then I noticed that she started acting a bit differently. So when coming home after daycare, she started demanding me to put the TV on. So obviously I didn't like that she was getting that attitude about the TV. And on top of that, I noticed that she wasn't really interested in doing constructive things anymore, like drawing or building a block tower. So I decided to pull the plug on screen time, pun intended, basically because, well, first of all, I didn't like that attitude that she was getting, and number 2, I wanted her to get into the habit of figuring out how to entertain herself, and ideally being creative about it. That was almost a year ago since going 0 screen time with my kids. Was it worth it? Have I lost my mind from not having a digital babysitter? I'll come back to that at the end of this video. For now, let's talk about the top 5 reasons why screen time is bad for kids. And what I'm about to say is entirely backed up by both research and psychological theories. Note as well that when I say screen time for kids, I'm mostly talking about kid-friendly content on iPads, phones, and TVs. Number 1, attention span. First of all, what is a good attention span? Is it simply the ability to focus on one thing for a really long time? But then wouldn't that mean that TikTokers and iPad kids have really good attention spans? A good attention span is when you can focus on one thing for a very long time while resisting distractions, especially the kinds of distractions that give your brain a dopamine hit. Dopamine is that feel-good chemical that your brain releases basically to say, hey, that feels good, do it again. So a kid might be fine focusing on an iPad for hours, but that's because the iPad is constantly giving his brain dopamine hits. Whereas if this kid were to clean his room, practice a musical instrument, or maybe do his homework, his brain would need to stay focused for a long time without getting these regular dopamine releases. This is why screen time can be so damaging to your attention span, especially with fast-paced, highly stimulating content. It basically trains your brain to expect constant novelty and rewards, which can make the real world seem frustratingly slow or boring. This is backed up by research studies that have found a link between excessive screen time and poorer attention spans. In this study, researchers in Canada followed over 2,300 preschoolers to see how their screen time affected their behaviour. They found that compared to children with less than 30 minutes a day of screen time, those watching more than 2 hours a day were 5 times more likely to report clinically significant inattention problems, and also had a 7.7-fold increased risk of meeting criteria for ADHD. Okay, but what if screen time doesn't cause poorer attention spans? What if it's the case that kids who already have poor attention spans are more likely to be attracted to screen time because of how fast-paced and rewarding it is? For ethical reasons, we can't directly test whether excessive screen time causes attention problems. But this study conducted a meta-analysis to explore this topic further. In other words, it looked at a lot of studies. This resulted in a total sample size of about 300,000 children aged under 10. Because these were longitudinal studies, or in other words, long-term studies, the researchers were able to ask the question, what comes first, screen time or attention problems? They found that excessive screen time can lead to attention problems, but also that attention problems can lead to excessive screen time. So in other words, it's a vicious cycle. A child might not have attention problems when getting excessive screen time, but these attention problems might appear later on. And if the kid does eventually start showing attention problems, this can make the kid even more drawn to the fast-paced content of screen time. Here's another interesting study, published in 2004. So before iPads, smartphones, OLED TVs, this was a time when screen time for kids was pretty much in the form of kids' TV shows on a box TV, maybe a plasma TV. The researchers followed 1,278 US children to see whether TV viewing in the toddler years could predict later attention problems. Parents reported how many hours of TV the child watched each day at ages 1 and 3. Then, at age 7, children were tested on attentional difficulties. They found that for each additional hour of screen time per day, the odds of having attention problems at age 7 went up by about 9%. So, for example, a child watching an average of 1 hour of screen time per day had roughly a 9% higher chance of showing attention problems at age 7, compared to a kid not getting any TV time. A child getting 2 hours on average of screen time per day had roughly a 20% higher chance of showing attention problems by the time they're 7. You get the idea. Now, interestingly, as a parent, you might think that 1 hour of screen time might be okay. Maybe 9% doesn't seem so concerning. But what you have to remember is the screen time that your kid could potentially be getting somewhere else that you're not necessarily aware of, such as at the grandparents' house, at a friend's house, maybe at daycare, at school, which means that your kid could potentially be getting a lot more screen time than you're actually aware of. Number 2, it's highly addictive. I've heard parents say, hey, what's the big deal with kids getting screen time? I had screen time when I was a kid and I turned out fine. But screen time was different back then. We're talking about small TVs, terrible audio quality, poor image resolution, TV intros that just went on forever, and you were a lot more limited in what you could watch. Also, a lot of houses had just the one TV in the house, and obviously kids couldn't bring the TVs with them to restaurants. Now, screen time is everywhere, and it's immersive, fast-paced, vibrant colors. You have endless options on what you can watch, and a lot of content now is deliberately designed to be as addictive as possible. But let's focus on a concept called variable ratio reward. This is something that is also used by pokies machines and social media platforms, basically to make their products as addictive as possible. It's basically when you get rewards often enough, but it's unpredictable when you'll get the next one. Kids are especially susceptible to dopamine. This is why they get really excited about simple little things like colors, wrapping paper, rainbows, the sky, clouds. Also, because their impulse control is still developing and because they can't yet understand long-term consequences, they're a lot more vulnerable to the addictive nature of these digital reward systems. This is why kids can so easily get addicted to screens. But this shouldn't be surprising. As soon as you turn the TV on, give them an iPad or give them your smartphone for them to play a game, you can instantly see how they just go into this trance. It's interesting as well that for us adults, even we have a hard time with screen addiction problems, and yet we're giving these devices to our kids to play with. There is also that when a kid becomes more and more addicted to a screen, they might spend less and less time doing healthy, constructive things, like playing outside, playing with friends, interacting with family, trying to read a book, and also they might even be using their screens to cope with their emotions. Tantrums suck, but kids kind of need to have tantrums so that they can work on their emotional regulation skills. If every time that a kid gets difficult, someone gives them an iPad to distract them from their emotions, what might this mean in the long term? If They don't have these opportunities to actually work on their emotional regulation skills. And on top of that, learning that they can use screen time to soothe them emotionally, or at least distract them from unpleasant emotions. These things together help explain why it is that screen-addicted kids also tend to have emotional and behavioral problems. And honestly, sometimes the screen addiction is so bad that these kids start getting confused about their own reality, like trying to zoom in on the real world, or swiping a book instead of flipping the page, or scrolling when they don't even have a phone. Number 3, educational disadvantage. I mentioned before that there is a clear link between excessive screen time and attention problems. If your kid has a poor attention span, then this can be a huge disadvantage educationally. Obviously, it's going to be harder for them to stay focused during class time, or even just completing some kind of educational activity. There is also evidence showing that excessive screen time is associated with poorer language development. The reason for this is because kids really need to learn through adult interaction so that they can practice speaking and also continuously get that feedback. This is backed up by a study that conducted brain imaging on 47 preschool-age children. The researchers found that those kids with higher screen time scores had weaker development of white matter pathways that support language and self-regulation. In other words, the brains of these children were less developed compared to those children who were getting low or no screen time.
These devices not only are addictive, they're designed to be addictive. And if you do brain scans on kids at 3 or 4 years of age who spend too much time on screens, it damages their brains. You can see the brain damage on the brain scans. So if I was a new parent, I have nothing to do with digital media around my kids.
Number 4, worse mental health. Here's an interesting study. It used a huge population-based sample of just over 40,000 US children and teenagers aged between 2 and 17 to examine how daily screen time relates to their psychological well-being. The researchers found that as long as at least 1 hour is spent per day on screen time, more hours of daily screen time were associated with lower psychological well-being, including less curiosity, lower self-control, more distractibility, more difficulty making friends, less emotional stability, being more difficult to care for, and an inability to finish tasks. Some interesting findings on the young children specifically. Those kids who had a high or moderate level of screen time had significantly worse self-control compared to those kids with low screen time, such as losing their temper or being difficult to calm down when they're overly excited. And those kids with moderate screen time had worse well-being compared to those kids with low screen time. What might explain these findings? It could be sleep disruption, less physical activity, less social interaction. In terms of being lower in self-control, as I mentioned before, it could be that they're not actually being given opportunities to practice calming themselves. So basically, whenever they start to get a bit difficult, they learn that a screen can distract them. There is also that if the kid is genuinely addicted to the screen, then obviously this is going to make it harder for them to exercise self-control. This is the same with any kind of addiction. It's harder to have self-control because whatever it is, you just really, really, really want it. Number 5, the importance of play. What is play exactly, and why do kids do it? You might be surprised to hear that play is basically a safe way to practice survival skills. This is why other animals also engage in play, such as a kitten pretending to hunt a bit of string, or puppies wrestling each other playfully. When kids play, it helps prepare them for adulthood, and it's beneficial to them in so many different ways. It encourages experimentation, imagination, and flexible thinking. It's great for language development because of practicing new words and expressions, and it lets them practice focusing, self-control, and resolving conflict with other kids. So the more screen time that a kid gets, the less playtime they get, which means that they start missing out on these benefits. As put by the authors of this paper, which by the way has been cited more than 1,000 times by other papers, children's free play with other children has declined sharply, while anxiety, depression, suicide, feelings of helplessness, and narcissism have increased sharply in children, adolescents, and young adults. So those were the top 5 reasons, but let's ask another question. Is there any kind of screen time that is okay for kids? So first of all, video calls are considered acceptable, basically because the social interaction can help with language development and also building bonds with family and friends. And interestingly, this is the only type of screen time that is considered acceptable for those kids aged between 0 and 2 years old. For those children aged 2 or over, co-viewing is also considered acceptable because the adult can pause, ask questions, and explain what's being shown. The idea is to turn screen time into social time. There is some evidence that some apps might have some educational benefits, such as with vocabulary and numeracy, but be wary that there may also be a trade-off with a child's attention span. And there's still that kids generally learn better through back and forth conversation with adults. Now, if you absolutely must give your kids some screen time, there is some evidence that Sesame Street has educational benefits. This is based on a paper that analysed 24 different studies on this, resulting in an analysis of 10,000 children from 15 countries, ranging in age and socioeconomic status. But keep in mind that if your child is aged 5 or over, they might not benefit as much from watching it. So how has zero screen time been for me and my girls? First of all, it hasn't been as challenging as what I was expecting. In my house, we're now just used to the TV being off. My toddler no longer demands that I put the TV on, and it's been really great seeing her come up with weird and wonderful ways to try and entertain herself. I've also enjoyed seeing her not just trying to complete a task, but really trying to focus on it. I will admit that sometimes it can be a bit difficult, so if I'm exhausted, I'm trying to relax, and my girls keep interrupting me, my strategy is to either find something for the girls to do, such as encouraging them to build a train, or I will just straight out say to my toddler, this is mummy's quiet time, you need to figure out what you can do to entertain yourself. Now, obviously I can't hide my kids from tech forever, and that's not what I would want in a way. To clarify, I'm not anti-tech. I just feel that at this point in time, my girls don't need a screen. Anyway, I hope this video has been useful to you. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section below.